In the past hour, we've seen the Northern Territory opposition push for Parliament to be recalled to deal with the crime in Alice Springs. It follows this 2-week youth curfew being imposed in the community in a bid to curb the escalating crime. Jarab Sharp has authored a Churchill Fellowship reporting on boosting cultural integrity for young Indigenous people and their families coming into contact with the legal and justice system. He's also Advocacy Manager for the North Australian Aboriginal Justice Agency, and he joins me live now. Thank you for your time. So, looking at the pictures from afar, it did feel as though this was getting out of control. Do you understand the government feeling as though it needed to take some form of additional action?
I mean, I've seen the images like everyone else, Tom, and they were horrific and unacceptable. And I think there is no denying the fact that there is a strong response needed from the law enforcement authorities when people are behaving in that manner. But my point would be that's exactly what has happened. Our service represents Aboriginal people in the Alice Springs courts every day, and we're seeing people who have been charged as a result of those incidents, and their matters will be dealt with in the courts in the appropriate way.
So this is because this sort of came out of one particular death, and it was essentially, it stemmed from, call it what you want, a dispute, something obviously a bit more serious than that between two families. But wasn't it spilling over beyond that? So I accept you say, you know, those elements were going through the criminal justice system, but it seemed to have spread more through the community, that beyond the normal court process needed to happen?
Yeah, I think you're right. There was two precipitating events. There was obviously a horrific car accident that happened a couple of days ago, and then that was followed with the scenes that we saw at the Todd Tavern. So both of those events happened. But to me, the problem is the response that's been instigated of a curfew for all young people in Alice Springs from 6 a.m. until 6 a.m. is entirely the wrong approach in terms of what's needed in response to those particular incidents. What is needed is responses that are developed in consultation with the Aboriginal community, with Aboriginal community-controlled organisations, and to look at the evidence of what works, because all of the evidence shows that youth curfews do not work. There is nowhere in the world that has said that a youth curfew is effective. It just criminalises young people. It ensnares young people in the justice system, and that's just not what we need in a place like Alice Springs, where the rates of Aboriginal people in jail and youth detention are already off the charts.
Yeah, that's obviously a huge issue, and incarceration rates and so on. The government's actually said we're not talking, or they're not talking about this being a criminal offence. So there are powers for police to move people off streets, but that's not a crime. Doesn't that keep them out of the criminal justice system? I understand they could be detained, and I'm not downplaying that could be, you know, an unwelcome experience for someone, to say the least, but they're not then tried, they're not going through the system. Isn't there a difference between the two?
There's a couple of problems here, and I think one of the major problems is that the government hasn't consulted with anyone before doing this, or if they have, it's not clear who they have consulted with. The instrument that police will be relying upon hasn't been released. We haven't seen what this is, what these emergency powers actually are. And there's a big difference between emergency powers in a situation like COVID and emergency powers in a situation like this. They really need to be spelled out so that police on the ground know exactly what they can and can't do. Young people of Alice
Would you be
Springs
assured at all if they were, if you were told it's not criminal what's happening, in whatever way they're either returned home, perhaps detained in some way temporarily, but it's not a crime? Is that at least better than it being so?
Look, the problem with that is that in any context where young people are having contact with the police, there is a very high risk of criminalisation, of young people ending up being charged. And that's what we've seen over the years. The big risk is when police...
So they're asked to move on, they resist, and that's when a crime is committed. Is that what you're alluding to, essentially?
Yeah, that's right. So police have that interaction with the young person, and then if the young person doesn't want to comply with what they're being asked to do, then things can escalate very quickly. So it could be disorderly conduct or resist arrest or an assault on police that can very quickly escalate from that initial interaction. And the big risk is if the police powers aren't clearly defined to start with, which, as I say, is a very real issue in this scenario, then the police don't have that certainty. And the young people themselves don't have that knowledge of what they can and can't do in a very vulnerable situation when they're interacting with police.
Okay. Jared Sharp, appreciate your time. Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Thanks so much.